It gives me no pleasure to quote the Hives and say, hate to say, I told you so. For a very long time, it has been clear that Keir Starmer, our Prime Minister, offers no meaningful alternative to the Conservatives, and that he was going to double down on the same failed economic policies which have trashed this country, breeding insecurity, hardship, turmoil, you name it. That's why some of us argued that given the Tories were finito, you could vote, say, Green or Independent without risk and help put pressure on Labour. That was about laying the foundations for what comes next, of which more towards the end of this video. Now, today, Keir Starmer has done a little speech in Downing Street in which, to be blunt, he promises misery. That's on top of the misery of the last 16 years since the 2008 crash, when social progress in this country essentially ground to a halt, after which British workers suffered the longest squeeze in wages since the Battle of Waterloo. We've had stagnant growth, weak productivity, underfunded and indeed vandalised public services which are falling apart, and all the resulting turmoil and division which emerges from that misery. Now let's listen to the Prime Minister, Sir Keir Starmer, as he stands behind a lectern emblazoned with fixing the foundations, which is a funny way of describing making life harder for people whose lives are already too hard.
But I will be honest with you, there is a budget coming in October, and it's going to be painful. We have no other choice, given the situation that we're in. Those with the broadest shoulders should bear the heavier burden, and that's why we're cracking down on non-doms. Those who made the mess should have to do their bit to clean it up, and that's why we're strengthening the powers of the water regulator and backing tough fines on the water companies that have let sewage flood our rivers, lakes and seas.
So this is giving George Osborne circa 2010. It's an attempt to soften up public opinion for misery by saying, as Thatcherite dogma would have it, there is no alternative, that you might not like what is going to happen, but there's no way out of it. Therefore, you're going to have to acquiesce, suck it up, be resigned to it all instead. Now, Starmer says that those with the broadest shoulders should bear the heaviest burden, but that is exactly what George Osborne himself used to say. Indeed, let me quote the former Chancellor of the Exchequer, George Osborne. He said, "Those with the broadest shoulders are bearing the greatest burden, for we are all in this together." Is that how you remember how that all panned out? Now, he says, Keir Starmer, that's why we're cracking down on nom-doms, which I entirely support, by the way, but that's likely to raise about £3.5 billion a year, which is welcome money. Any money is welcome, but frankly, just a very small amount in the grand scheme of things. He then cites making the water regulator tougher as another example. Weak stuff. Those profiteers are polluting our waterways. It's a threat to our health. They're failing to fix the water infrastructure. We're losing about 3 billion litres of water every single day through leaky pipes, whilst making a packet from ripping off off the customers, the consumers, people who depend on water. It is a natural monopoly. Now, they should be brought into public ownership as an emergency measure with no compensation, with their bosses fired and criminal investigations launched, not just chat about making the regulator a bit tougher. Now, let's talk about the pain that this government has already promised. They refused to repeal the two-child benefit cap, which drives hundreds of thousands of children either into poverty or further into hardship, mostly working households. Most people in Britain in poverty are, of course, in work. The research shows that it fails on its own supposed terms, that it has no impact on employment levels, and it makes families no smaller. So this idea that it will stop people having bigger families, that doesn't actually pan out at all, according to the research. Poverty isn't a static number. People move in and out of hardship. People have kids and their circumstances change. Maybe their partner walks out on them. Maybe they lose work. All it does is impose poverty on children for choices they haven't even made. With poverty costing all of us, those who grow up in poverty are more likely to suffer from physical and mental ill health. That costs the NHS. It costs society. They're more likely to end up themselves in poverty and unemployment or underemployment in adulthood. That costs society all over again. It is cruelty for the sake of it. It is a policy which was designed by George Osborne to tap into the basest prejudices people have about those in poverty. Poisonous Victorian ideas about the undeserving overbreeding poor. And they decided to clobber the other side of the age spectrum, pensioners as well, by stripping away winter fuel payments, except for those in receipt of pension credit or other means-tested benefits. Now, there's several problems here because, you see, the only way of ensuring that everyone who needs help gets help is through universal benefit, which is in total which is why in total, there was an estimated £23 billion of benefit entitlements which go unclaimed every single year. That's the real problem. That's about 10 times the amount lost to benefit fraud, I would add. Now, about 30% of pensioners who are eligible for pension credit don't get it. These are pensioners who are below the poverty line. And now they're going to be clobbered all over again because their winter fuel payments are going to be taken away. And it's not just them. There's those pensioners as well who are just above the eligibility criteria for winter fuel payments who are struggling, who will now have that support taken away too. Now, according to the charity Age UK, that means up to 2 million pensioners without the vital support they need to stay warm this coming winter. That comes on top of the energy regulator Ofgem announcing a 10% hike in the energy price cap starting from the 1st of October. So this is going to be a dramatic rise in energy bills for so many poor and struggling pensioners who are going to be driven into hardship in the last few years of their lives. Now, continuing the theme of I hate to say I told you so, I did say that Labour were going to do this in the election. I said over and over again there was a shortfall of £20 billion or so in government expenditure, and that Labour wasn't being clear about that because they'd have to declare what they would do about it. Let's have a listen to what I said, just one of the clips. There were many times I said this. Let's just listen. According to the Institute for Fiscal Studies, who you just quoted, there is at the moment an annual £20 billion worth black hole. A black hole in our finances worth £20 billion a year. If you don't fill that £20 billion a year, that means you have to cut public services by £20 billion a year. That's on top of all the cuts that we've already had for the last 14 years. So if you wanted to just stand still and look at the state of our services now, just look at them. If you want to stand still, you've got to find £20 billion a year extra to fill that hole. How have we got through? And this isn't just about our politicians. I'm sorry, and I've been working in the British media now for 13 years. How the hell have we got through weeks of a general election campaign without the main focus on domestic policy about a £20 billion a year black hole and how we fill it? Where has the questions been? Instead, we had for a while Rishi Sunak, I'm afraid, making up nonsense about increasing that Labour was going to have this tax bombshell. The question should be, we should raise taxes, not on most people. Most people can't afford extra taxes at the moment, but the well-to-do are doing very well. They can. Okay. And unless we do that, this country is going to fall apart. Now, I said this over and over and over again during the election. Other than the Tories are toast, so let's send Labour a message, this was the main message I had during the election. I'm not a genius. I'm not a professional economist. I just knew, based on the information, what was a basic, obvious public fact. And I noted that based on the fiscal rules and indeed Labour ruling out borrowing as well. Now, I would note that during the election, several economists signed a letter in The Guardian entitled Labour's offering a credible plan to address Britain's economic problems. The final paragraph was, contrary to what the government has been saying, we believe that Labour provides a credible economic alternative across all these dimensions and that Keir Starmer and Rachel Reeves offer a combination of stability and an ambitious set of reforms to help grow the economy. Praise indeed. Now, one of these economists was Professor Danny Bankflower. So it was perhaps somewhat surprising that just 2 months later he tweets, prove me wrong, but Labour has no clear economic ideas at all. How is social cohesion to be restored? Where are the plans for restoring public services, building libraries, swimming pools, nurseries, schools and hospitals, hiring social workers and teachers and doctors and nurses and community workers? How to help the depressed young? They have, in capitals, no vision. Bit of a shift in tone there from the good professor, it must be said. He did, after all, use his professional reputation as a leading economist to try and persuade the electorate that Labour had, to quote the letter, a credible economic alternative to fix the country's many problems. Now, when challenged about this, he tweeted, I did sign it given the alternative was much worse. 14 years of the heartless, evil, incompetent Tories was enough. I had hoped they had fine secret planning, but seems I was wrong. Well, let's try not to be bitter here. To quote Luke 15:7 from the Bible, there is more rejoicing in heaven over one sinner who repents than over 99 just people who need no repentance. I do think on balance you shouldn't tell people things you don't think are true. Danny Blanchard clearly didn't know they had this credible alternative. That's what the letter was saying. He was hoping something might turn up. That was a secret plan in some drawer somewhere, which was the basis of a lot of Labour support, along with maybe they don't really believe all the things they've been promising over and over and over again. Had to say, during the election, one senior Labour source told me if you're expecting a secret plan somewhere, there isn't one. I think we've seen that come to fruition. Now, government outriders have been out in force, it's fair to say. Ian Dunt, the comically of Starmerism, who thinks, like me when I was 12, that swearing a lot makes him edgy, says the party political strategy of the Starmer speech is obvious and well understood, but his central argument is undeniable. A situation where the PM is having to check prison places daily during riots is symptomatic of an utterly broken country. He's not swearing, for a change. Why pretend this is a debate going on right now? No one credible is questioning the obvious glaring fact that this country is an appalling mess, thanks to the Tories. The debate is, or should be, about how we get out of the mess, and that is about raising expenditure by raising taxes on the thriving rich. Now, it's very likely that Labour will rightly raise some taxes on the well-off, perhaps, particularly on capital gains, inheritance tax. That's very welcome, but it isn't enough. And on top of driving kids and pensioners into poverty, that means a 1% increase in public spending, which overall means cuts in real terms for some government departments. There is a word for that. And the word for that is austerity. And Keir Starmer said over and over and over again in the election that there would be no return to austerity. That was yet another of his solemn promises, which he has, once again, for the millionth time, reneged on. Now, they may go like David Cameron and George Osborne, but before them, well, look, yeah, many struggling people are going to suffer, but so will the well-off. We're all in this together. Bollocks! There's just bollocks. Small tax rises on the very well-off, comparatively, will still leave them very well off. There was a Labour Party post in 1929, the 1929 general election, which actually fleshes this out very well, headed with equality of sacrifice with a question mark. It shows four men standing on a ladder which goes down into water. At the bottom, there is an unemployed man so far down the ladder that only his head is above the waterline. Above him is a man on £250 a year. Above him is a man on £1,000 a year. Above him is a rather plump man on £10,000 a year, which was a lot of money in 1929. And the man at the top is quoted as saying, equality of sacrifice. That's the big idea, friends. Let's all step down one rung. That will, of course, drown the unemployed man and leave the man on £250 a year just above the waterline. The well-off, of course, will still be fine. Now, I was somewhat surprised to hear LBC presenter James O'Brien say the following on his show today.
Oasis might be getting back together, but this is not 1997. Things can only get worse before they get better. And that, I realise, was the speech I've been waiting, I think, over 10 years for a British Prime Minister to deliver. And I just remind you again, before you waste tuppence accusing me of footballification or client journalism or all the other things that we used to point out happening when the various lies and atrocities were being committed on the country by the last several governments. I said the same thing for about an hour and a half about Rishi Sunak. And I have in the past been more than happy to castigate leaders of the Labour Party. I'm responding entirely to one man, one speech, one government and one vision. And I really, really like what I see. And I can't articulate to you how weird that feels. I can't articulate to you how scared I am even to say those words out loud.
Really? Really, though? Has James O'Brien, honestly, hand on heart, been waiting for the last 14 years to hear a speech which says there will be misery now, but that will mean things will be better at some undetermined future moment? Promise? Because a major part of my job for the last 14 years, unfortunately, has been having to listen to the speeches of our rulers, and I can honestly say that I've heard that same speech over and over and over again for the last 14 years. Here's an example. David Cameron, 2010, when he became, tragically, Prime Minister of this country.
I came into politics because I love this country. I think its best days still lie ahead, and I believe deeply in public service. And I think the service our country needs right now is to face up to our really big challenges, to confront our problems, to take difficult decisions, to lead people through those difficult decisions so that together we can reach better times ahead.
Go through difficult decisions so we can reach better times ahead. It's the same speech. Yeah, it's not quite the same words, but it means the same thing, doesn't it? The Brexiteers also did the whole, yeah, it might be painful now, but it'll be better in the long run, I promise. Well, I remember James O'Brien wasn't a fan of that. Quite rightly so. Did lots of fiery polemics about it. Now, as the economist Richard Murphy puts it, there is literally no need at all for Labour to deliver a painful budget in October. There is massive capacity to increase taxes on wealth. If Labour wanted to borrow, they could, and there are people who want good work. Absolutely this. Do you know how much the combined fortunes of those on the Sunday Times rich list, how much that's worth? We're talking about the wealthiest 350 Britons, just 350 people. 250 households. It's worth approaching £800 billion. That is more than the entire economy of Poland. Just our top 350 richest Britons own wealth equivalent to the entire nation of Poland. That is beyond absurd. It is a criminal indictment of our economic and social order that the vast wealth created by the hard graft of millions of people gets sucked into the bank accounts of such a tiny group of people who often then shuffle that vast wealth offshore, many of them barely paying proper taxes. Now, Labour decided to rule out taxes on the well-off, from income tax to wealth taxes to corporation tax. There was no political necessity there. They would have won the election anyway. As it was, they shed votes to their left, even though voters were desperate to get rid of the Tories, understandably, after 14 disastrous years. This is all a political choice, and they are doubling down on economic policies which have literally led to the mess we're in. We've done cuts. We've done driving people into poverty and insecurity. We were promised over and over again sunlit uplands after misery. That never happened. Why does anyone believe it will be any different this time? It won't, which is why if you did vote Labour thinking there would be change, well, look at what you're getting. Literally more of the same. In last month's election, Greens were second place behind Labour in dozens of seats, and there were independents which ran Labour close too, not least in the seat of the Health Secretary, West Streeting. Now, obviously, overall, you got 4 Greens who won and 5 left-wing independents, but a lot of second-placed candidates who are nipping at the heels of Labour before they were even in power. Now, Labour could be replaced in many seats, scores of seats, with progressive alternatives in the next election, but we've got to build for that to happen. So let's get cracking. Straightforward. Do you really want to spend the rest of your life being told over and over again that misery beckons? More and more misery. One day, things will be fine. We need the misery. We need the pain, because one day that will mean that sacrifice will deliver the goods. Do you just want that forever? Is that literally just you get a change in government and they go, well, unfortunately, because of the terrible mess we were left, we have to do lots of terrible things, but one day things will be fine. Do you want that? This is a wealthy country. It's an exceptionally wealthy country. It's just, we have a model that just drags that wealth into the bank accounts of such a small group of people. That has to change. But it will only change if you do something about it. Because at the moment, Labour has decided they can get away with it. It's up to us to make it clear that they can't. Please like and subscribe. Do leave your thoughts, your comments. Help us keep the show on the road at patreon.com/OJS84. Got some very exciting work which is coming out soon. One of the reasons not as many videos as we've been doing is because of this huge project, which you'll see. So looking forward to that. So yeah, share, subscribe. Speak to you soon.